You tell yourself you're free. You choose your job. You raise a family. You buy what you want. You even say what you think. But look closer. Notice how your mood shifts when your boss frowns at your work, how your chest tightens when family members whisper about your choices, how one cold glance in a meeting can silence your confidence, how a single comment online can ruin an entire day. If your peace collapses the moment someone disapproves, you're not free. You're a prisoner. And the walls of that prison aren't built from stone, they're built from opinions. Lao Tzu saw this trap more than 2,000 years ago. Care about what other people think, he said, and you will always be their prisoner. Yet here you are, centuries later, living out that prophecy. You bite your tongue at work to avoid rocking the boat. You go along with family traditions that drain you, just so no one calls you selfish. You scroll through other people's perfect lives, wondering why yours doesn't measure up. You call it being responsible. You call it being kind. You call it keeping the peace. But beneath all of that is fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. And here's the paradox. The more you chase approval, the less free you feel. Because approval may soothe you in the moment, but it slowly becomes a chain. You've mistaken freedom for permission. And as long as other people's opinions own your choices, you're not living as yourself. You're living as a reflection. So the question is not, are you free? The question is, who really owns your freedom? You or the opinions of everyone else? Approval feels harmless, even necessary. The raised eyebrow of a manager, the nod of a partner, the rare, well done from a parent who never gave it easily. It feels like a breath of air you didn't know you were holding. Psychologists call this the social comparison reflex. We measure ourselves against others to know where we stand. It isn't weakness, it's wiring. From the beginning of human history, belonging to the tribe meant survival. To be left out meant danger. Your nervous system hasn't forgotten that. That's why rejection doesn't just sting emotionally. It lights up the same parts of the brain that process physical pain. A performance ignored, a cold silence, an unanswered message. Your body reacts as if it's been struck. And the reverse is just as powerful. Every compliment, every approving glance, every small recognition gives you a burst of dopamine. The brain whispers, "Good job, you're safe." So you chase it again, and again, until approval starts to feel less like a bonus and more like oxygen. This pattern begins early. As a child, you learn that certain smiles mean safety, while frowns bring disapproval. Maybe you were praised for being easygoing, so you learned to hide your anger. Or you were told not to make a scene, so you buried your needs. Slowly, approval became the currency of love, and you grew up thinking it was the same as worth. Now, as an adult, the stage just changes. At work, your value feels tied to reviews and promotions. In relationships, it shows up as saying yes when you're exhausted, just to keep the peace. In family life, it's keeping up appearances at gatherings, even when you'd rather stay home. And online, it's that quiet itch to refresh the feed, waiting for some small signal that you matter. On the surface, it looks like responsibility, but underneath, it's survival mode. Approval isn't just nice anymore, it's become the condition for your peace. And here lies the danger. When something feels like oxygen, you'll do almost anything to keep it, even if it means betraying yourself, even if it means silencing what you know is true. That's the illusion of safety. Approval calms you in the moment, but it quietly enslaves you over time. You're not free, you're living on a leash. And this isn't a modern discovery. The wisest voices across history saw it coming long before notifications, promotions, or neighborhood gossip. And if they named this trap thousands of years ago, the question is, why are we still bowing to opinions today? Lao Tzu was blunt. Care about what other people think, and you will always be their prisoner. For him, freedom wasn't about abandoning people or hiding in the mountains. It was about something far more subtle, refusing to let the shifting moods of the crowd dictate your peace. He saw how quickly admiration turned to scorn, how today's applause became tomorrow's condemnation. And he warned that if your sense of self rises and falls with those waves, you'll never know true stillness. The Stoics, centuries later, echoed the same wisdom in their own way. Epictetus, born a slave, said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." He knew that the price of self-mastery is often misunderstanding. People will call you strange if you walk a path they can't see. But if your worth depends on their approval, you will never take that step. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, wrote in his journal, not for the crowd, not for history, but for himself, that the only true fortress is the inner citadel. Armies can breach walls, cities can fall, but if you guard your mind against the tyranny of opinions, no insult or gossip can touch you. That was his survival strategy as a man surrounded by flattery and betrayal. Seneca added another layer. He noticed that much of our misery comes not from what people actually say, but from what we imagine they think. Even in ancient Rome, people rehearsed disapproval before it arrived, punishing themselves in advance. It's striking how timeless that habit is. Sleepless nights wasted on words that were never even spoken. And outside Rome, the Buddha spoke with equal clarity. He warned that craving, including the craving for praise, is the root of suffering. Because no matter how much admiration you collect, it vanishes like water through your fingers. One compliment soothes you, but soon you need another, and then another. The hunger never ends. These weren't idle reflections. They were survival lessons. They saw clearly that people who live for the crowd's approval lose themselves to it. They don't live as themselves. They live as performers, shaped by the cheers and jeers of the audience. And here's the uncomfortable truth. That stage hasn't disappeared. It's still here, only bigger. Back then it was the marketplace, the Senate, the village square. Today it's the boardroom, the family dinner table, the algorithm of your newsfeed. The costumes have changed, but the play is the same. So maybe the problem isn't that we don't know the warnings. Maybe it's that the prison still disguises itself too well. It doesn't look like chains. It looks like belonging. It looks like success. It looks like being loved. And that illusion is what quietly seduces us into wearing the mask. Carl Jung called it the persona, the face you present to the world so that you'll be accepted. At first, it feels harmless, even useful. You smile when you're exhausted. You agree when you disagree. You make yourself agreeable at work, dependable at home, easygoing among friends. The mask smooths the rough edges that might provoke rejection. But here's the danger. Wear it long enough, and you forget it's a mask. It fuses to your skin. You start believing the performance is you. And when that happens, you don't just hide from the world. You lose yourself. Jung warned that everything you push down, everything you exile in the name of approval, doesn't vanish. It becomes the shadow, the parts of you that ache for honesty but never get air. The anger you silence, the grief you disguise, the creativity you hide because it might look foolish. These parts go underground, but they never stop knocking. And the more you deny them, the lonelier you feel. Not just unseen by others, but unseen by yourself. This is what Soren Kierkegaard meant when he said the deepest despair is not wanting to be oneself. It's not heartbreak or failure that wounds us most. It's the slow erosion of authenticity, the daily choice to live as a reflection instead of a presence. You felt it, holding back ideas in a meeting, knowing they mattered but swallowing them anyway, laughing at jokes you don't find funny just to keep the peace, saying yes to favors and obligations while resenting the silence of your own voice. On the surface, you look responsible, reliable, admirable, but inside, something hollows out. And here's the paradox. The very mask that wins you approval deepens your invisibility. People admire the role, but they never meet the person. Their affection lands on the performance, not the self. And no amount of applause for the mask can cure the ache of being unseen underneath. So you keep performing. You keep polishing the mask. You keep hoping someone will see through it to the real you. But they can't. Not because they won't, but because you never let them. And slowly, the mask stops being protection and becomes its own prison. One you built to survive, but that now keeps you trapped, which leads to the cruelest twist of all. In today's world, this ancient mask has been given a new stage, one that never goes dark. one that demands the performance continue day and night. That stage is social media, not just amplifying the prison of opinions, but perfecting it. Every like, every comment, every view is another brick in its walls. Neuroscientists have shown how each notification sparks a hit of dopamine in the brain, the same chemical tied to craving and addiction. You post a picture, you refresh, and for a moment, the ping tells you, you matter. But silence? Silence feels like rejection, and so the loop begins. Refresh, reward, repeat. It's no accident. Platforms are designed this way. The endless scroll, the tiny red dots, the algorithms that drip feed you feedback, all of it engineered to keep you hooked on the currency of attention. Perform or be forgotten. That is the unspoken rule. And nothing enslaves the human spirit more subtly than the fear of invisibility. Think of how quickly judgment travels online. One awkward photo, one unpopular opinion, and the backlash can feel immediate and merciless. The fear of being ridiculed isn't just magnified, it's multiplied by millions. So people edit, filter, rehearse, until nothing raw or human is left. It's not self-expression anymore, it's self-curation. Researcher Brené Brown warns that vulnerability is the birthplace of real connection. But online, vulnerability often feels like exposure. So instead, people perform. They show only the highlight reel, the curated mask. And in the process, real intimacy is lost. Conversations become rehearsals, friendships become comparisons, and community becomes a stage where everyone is performing for everyone else, but no one is truly seen. That's the hidden cruelty of this new prison. The illusion of connection, while loneliness deepens. But the cost of this prison doesn't just stay online. It invades your body, your mind, and your relationships. Think about the constant tension you carry in your chest, the tightness that never really goes away. That's not just stress, that's the tax of chasing approval. Every time you wait for someone's reaction, every time you replay a conversation to guess how they judged you, your nervous system is running at full speed. Psychologists call it anticipatory anxiety, the way your body braces for criticism even before it comes. Your muscles stay tight, your sleep grows shallow, your thoughts spiral, not because there's real danger, but because you've taught your brain that belonging depends on performance. And that's how burnout sneaks in. Not only from long hours or heavy workloads, but from the endless, invisible labor of being who you think others want you to be. It's exhausting to play a role that never ends. You smile when you don't feel like smiling. You say yes when your whole body aches to say no. You keep handing out pieces of yourself until there's nothing left to give. This isn't just emotional fatigue. It's the slow fracture of self, what philosophers have long called self-betrayal. Because every time you silence your truth to win approval, you're teaching yourself that your needs don't matter, that your worth is conditional, that you must shrink to stay safe. And loneliness grows from that shrinking. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of invisibility. Being surrounded, but never recognized as yourself. You could be at a dinner table, in a meeting, scrolling through hundreds of friends, and still feel unseen. Because if no one knows the real you, what good is the company? Neuroscience confirms what philosophy has always said. Chronic people-pleasing keeps the stress hormone cortisol elevated, weakening your immune system, eroding your memory, even changing the way your brain processes identity. Psychologists call it identity diffusion, the gradual loss of a clear sense of self. You become a collage of everyone's expectations, while the core of you fades. This hits hardest in midlife. You're carrying a mortgage, a team that looks to you, aging parents who need you, kids who watch you, a marriage or a recovery from one. Approval chasing hides inside being responsible, until you realize you've built a life that impresses everyone but the person living it. That's not maturity, that's managed collapse. And here's the cruelest irony. The more approval you chase, the less peace you ever find. Because the prison you live in isn't built by others' opinions. It's built by your decision to believe them. And yet, this cost doesn't end with you or me. When entire societies start living for approval, the prison expands. And history shows us just how dangerous that can be. Philosopher John Stuart Mill warned of it in the 19th century. He called it the tyranny of the majority. Not tyranny by kings or armies, but by opinion. When the crowd's judgment becomes law, people stop thinking for themselves. They conform, not out of conviction, but out of fear of rejection. And soon, freedom of thought disappears without a single shot fired. History is full of these silences. Moments when people knew the truth but swallowed it, afraid of being mocked, excluded, or punished. Societies where dissent wasn't crushed by force but by ridicule, because sometimes laughter wounds more deeply than chains. Friedrich Nietzsche saw the same danger in his vision of the last man, a figure who avoids risk, craves comfort, and congratulates himself for being safe. He warned that once a culture becomes obsessed with comfort and approval, it stops producing greatness. It chooses ease over truth, applause over authenticity. And what begins as safety ends as stagnation, not just for individuals, but for entire civilizations that lose the will to grow. You can see it in education. Children praise not for curiosity, but for compliance. The quiet ones, the agreeable ones, the ones who never disrupt. These are the ones called good. And so, from the very beginning, approval becomes the lesson. Not truth, not courage, but fitting in. You can see it in workplaces too. Brilliant ideas vanish unspoken, not because people lack them, but because cultures quietly teach that approval is safer than originality. Whole teams nod along with flawed plans because speaking up risks disapproval. Innovation dies, not from lack of talent, but from the fear of standing apart. And you can see it in politics. Leaders chosen not for wisdom or integrity, but for charisma, for popularity, for saying what the crowd already believes. It's no wonder Plato once warned that when opinion rules, demagogues rise, and truth is drowned by noise. When conformity becomes the currency of survival, societies hollow out from within. They lose the very voices that could have saved them. And history is clear. No culture thrives long when approval is prized more than truth. So, if opinions enslave us, personally and collectively, what does real freedom look like? The French philosopher Michel de Montaigne believed the answer was simple, though not easy. Belong to yourself. The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself, he wrote, because once you stop borrowing your worth from the crowd, you begin to live from a steadier center. Belonging to yourself doesn't mean isolation. It means your voice, your choices, your worth are no longer rented out to approval. This is the freedom psychiatrist Viktor Frankl discovered in the most brutal conditions imaginable. Surrounded by suffering in the concentration camps, he realized that one freedom always remained: the freedom to choose your stance. Everything else could be stripped away: possessions, family, even dignity. But the space between stimulus and response was still yours. And in that space, Frankl argued, meaning is born. Nietzsche pressed the same truth in a different key. Become who you are, not who your family expects, not who the crowd applauds, not who fear shapes, but who you are when the mask falls. It isn't a path for the faint of heart. Becoming who you are means facing parts of yourself the crowd would never approve, but it's the only path that makes you strong from the inside out. The great wisdom traditions echo this shift. Buddhism teaches that suffering begins with craving, the endless hunger for validation, for more, for control. Freedom begins when you stop feeding that hunger and return to what is. Taoism calls it Wu Wei, effortless action, the art of moving with life rather than forcing it. It isn't passivity, it's presence, a way of living where you stop bending yourself into the shape others demand and allow your nature to unfold. Freedom from opinions doesn't mean shutting out reality. There's a difference between approval and feedback. Approval demands performance to feel safe. Feedback helps you grow while remaining yourself. You can welcome correction without renting out your worth. The test is simple. After you listen, do you feel clearer or smaller? Clarity builds you. Smallness cages you. Choose clarity. Keep your center. And once you see that difference, the path forward becomes clearer. When you root your worth in something deeper than applause, the crowd's weather stops dictating your climate. You can listen without begging. You can learn without groveling. You can speak without performing. This is the beginning of inner freedom. The moment you realize you don't have to bow to opinions because the ground beneath you is already enough. And when you stop bowing, you feel something subtle shift, like a key turning quietly in a lock. From the inside, life begins to breathe again. Not because the world has grown kinder, but because you've stopped making the world your master. You discover a new kind of power in the smallest choices. You say no without apology, and the ground doesn't collapse. You sit in silence without fear, not scrambling to fill every pause with explanations or justifications. You show up without a mask, and though not everyone understands, the people who matter finally see you. This is what psychologists call authenticity, alignment between your inner world and your outer life. And research consistently finds that authenticity isn't just inspiring, it's healthy. People who live in alignment report greater resilience, lower stress, and deeper satisfaction. Not because life gets easier, but because the tension of pretending dissolves. Think of the freedom this brings. A conversation that once left you anxious now feels steady, because you're no longer rehearsing lines in your head. A relationship that once felt heavy grows lighter, because you're no longer managing every detail of how you're perceived. Even solitude becomes less frightening, because you no longer abandon yourself the moment others aren't there to approve of you. And here's how you can ground this freedom in practice. When the voices of others press in, anchor yourself with 3 simple checks: a breath, a boundary, a belief. A slow breath, to remind your nervous system you're safe. A boundary, even a small no, to remind yourself you still have choice. A belief, one clear truth about who you are, repeated until it steadies you. These aren't escapes from the world. They're reminders that you don't need to hand your worth to it. This is where Lao Tzu's wisdom returns in full force. He warned that when your peace depends on the crowd's thoughts, you live as their captive. But when you stop caring in that desperate, approval-chasing way, you don't become careless, you become clear. You begin to act not from fear of judgment, but from presence, from strength. And that's the paradox. The less you bend for opinions, the more others respect you. True strength isn't controlling the crowd. It's no longer needing the crowd. The freedom you once begged for in their approval arrives the moment you stop depending on it. And so the prison of opinions begins to crumble. Not because the voices vanish, but because they no longer hold the key to your peace. The chains fall quiet, and what's left is yours to reclaim. And in that silence, you begin to see what freedom has always been. Freedom has never meant escaping people. It has always meant reclaiming yourself. You cannot silence the world. People will always have opinions, loud ones, careless ones, shifting with the wind. But you can choose not to make those voices your prison guards. Because freedom doesn't come when the noise stops. It comes when you no longer hand your peace over to the noise. Picture this: you, standing steady in silence, while the chatter of the crowd fades into the background. Not because the world grew quiet, but because you finally grew free. So let me ask you, where do opinions weigh heaviest in your life? At work, in your family, or within yourself? Share it in the comments. Your story might be the mirror someone else needs. And if this reflection stirred something in you, subscribe and come back. Because this is a space where you don't need approval to belong.